He spent his last dollar on a woman no one else wanted, and before the sun climbed over the peaks, he began to understand some prices are measured in fate, not money. The trading post sat alone at nearly 6,000 feet above sea level, where the pine trees thinned and the air carried the cold bite of early winter even in October, a place where men traded furs, tools, and sometimes things that didn't belong on any honest ledger. Elias Whitaker had only come down from the high ridges for salt, coffee, and a box of .30-30 cartridges he probably wouldn't need if the winter stayed quiet. His boots were worn through at the edges, his coat stitched 3 different times with 3 different colors of thread, and the single silver dollar in his pocket was meant to last him until spring thaw. Then he heard the voice. $1. That's all she's worth now. The words didn't sound right in the mountain air. Nothing about the scene did. A small crowd of traders stood in a loose circle near the supply wagon, their breath turning to fog in the cold morning light, their eyes carrying that restless look men get when something feels wrong, but not wrong enough for them to walk away. She stood in the center, still, hood pulled low, hands folded quietly like she was waiting for weather to change. Not begging, not crying, not even looking afraid. That was the first strange thing. Most people in trouble showed it in their shoulders or their breathing. She stood like stone, like she had already survived worse storms than these men. Elias tried to ignore it. Trouble had a way of finding men who asked too many questions, and he had survived 34 winters by keeping his life small and quiet. But then one of the buyers laughed and said, "Ain't nobody paying more than that for damaged goods." The words hung there, ugly, out of place. Elias felt something shift in his chest, the way a frozen branch cracks under snow weight. Before he understood why, his hand was already in his pocket. The coin felt heavier than it should have. His last dollar. 3 months of trapping work. Gone in one decision. "I'll take her," he heard himself say. The men looked at him the way people look at a man who just stepped into deep water without testing the depth. "You sure, mountain man?" the trader asked. "No refunds." Elias stepped forward anyway and placed the coin into the man's palm. The metal clicked softly, a small sound that somehow felt louder than a rifle shot in the quiet morning air. The trader shrugged and stepped back like he had just unloaded a problem. Elias didn't reach for her, didn't touch her arm, just nodded toward the trail like she could choose to follow or not. That was the second strange thing. She followed, silent footsteps on frozen dirt. When they reached his mule, he finally spoke without looking at her. "You don't owe me anything." For a long moment she said nothing. Only the wind moving through dry grass and the distant cry of a hawk filled the space between them. Then her voice came, calm and clear, carrying an education and confidence that didn't belong to someone sold for a single coin. "You shouldn't have spent your last dollar on me, Mr. Whitaker." Elias froze. He had never told her his name. The mountain wind carried the smell of frost and pine sap as Elias slowly turned toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly beneath the brim of his weathered hat. Not from fear, but from the quiet calculation of a man who had lived too long alone to ignore something that did not make sense. He had told no one his name that morning, had spoken maybe 12 words since sunrise. Yet she had said it like she had known him for years. Elias did not reach for his rifle. He did not step back. He simply studied her the way he studied incoming weather, looking for the signs that told him whether to prepare for snow or trust the clear sky. "Not many people know me up here," he said quietly. Her hood remained low, but he could see the faint movement of her breathing, steady and controlled, not the breathing of someone rescued, but of someone deciding something important. "I asked the storekeeper before you spoke," she answered. "You were the only man who did not laugh." That answer settled something small in his chest, but not everything. His mule shifted beside them, leather harness creaking softly, steam rising from the animal's back in the cold air. The woman reached up slowly, not removing the hood, only adjusting. It's slightly as if she was used to being watched. Her hands were not rough like most frontier women he had known. No cracked knuckles, no nervous movement. Her fingers were steady, deliberate, like someone trained to remain calm when others were not. That was the third strange thing. Elias untied a small canvas sack from his saddle and handed it toward her without ceremony. "Coffee. It is not fresh, but it is warm." She hesitated only a second before accepting it. "Thank you." Her voice carried a softness that did not match the strength in her posture. She did not drink immediately. Instead, she held the cup between her palms, letting the warmth settle into her skin like someone remembering what safety felt like. Minutes passed. No questions. No explanations. Just the sound of wind moving across the ridge and the distant rattling of loose wagon chains from the trading post behind them. Finally, she spoke again. "Why did you do it?" Elias shrugged slightly. Seemed like the right thing. She gave a faint breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh, but stopped before becoming one. Men do not usually spend their last dollar on what is right. Elias looked out toward the mountain trail leading back to his cabin, a narrow path climbing another 8 miles into timber and stone and quiet. "I do not usually either." That was when he noticed it. A small detail most men would miss. Beneath the edge of her sleeve, just for a second as she adjusted her grip on the tin cup, he saw fabric finer than anything sold within 100 miles. Hand stitching. Patterned thread. Not decoration. Meaning. His instincts told him the truth before his thoughts could catch up. This woman had not fallen into trouble by accident. Trouble had followed her here. She seemed to sense his realization because her next words came softer, almost like a warning given out of respect. "You should not take me with you." Elias asked the obvious question. "Why?" She finally turned her head slightly toward the long valley below, where the morning sun was beginning to burn the frost off the grass. "Because men will come looking." Elias followed her gaze. For a long moment he saw nothing. Then far below, maybe 2 miles out along the lower switchback trail, 3 small shapes moved against the pale. Dust road, riders climbing slow and steady toward the trading post. Elias exhaled once. Not surprised, just certain. They already are. The 3 riders moved like dark pins against the pale ribbon of mountain road, still far enough away to be harmless, close enough to mean the day was already changing. Elias watched them the way a man watches smoke on the horizon, not with panic, but with the quiet acceptance that weather does not ask permission before it turns. Beside him, the woman did not move. She did not gasp. She did not run. She only watched with the still patience of someone who had expected this moment long before it arrived. "You still have time to walk away," she said quietly. Elias gave a small shake of his head. "If I walk away now, they still ride up that trail. Only difference is I would know I left someone behind." The words seemed to land somewhere deeper than he intended because she lowered her eyes slightly, not in shame, but in recognition. "You do not even know who I am," she said. Elias rested his gloved hand against the saddle horn, rough leather against rough skin. "I know enough." She studied him like she was measuring the weight of his answer. "What do you think you know?" Elias took his time before answering. "You do not stand like someone who belongs to anyone. You do not talk like someone who grew up poor. And you do not scare easy." A quiet silence followed that felt almost like respect. Then she asked, "And that does not worry you?" Elias gave the smallest hint of a tired smile. "Everything worries me. I just choose what is worth worrying about." The wind shifted, colder now, carrying the distant rhythm of hooves echoing faintly against stone. Maybe 10 minutes away now. Maybe less. The woman slowly reached up and for the first time pushed the hood back just enough for sunlight to touch part of her face. Not fully revealed. Just enough. Enough for Elias to see calm gray eyes that held more years than her face suggested. Enough for him to see she was not hiding out of fear. She was hiding out of necessity. "My name is Clara," she said. The name sounded simple, but the way she said it sounded like she was giving him something valuable. Elias nodded. "Once. Elias." "I know," she answered softly. That almost made him laugh. Almost. He noticed something else then. Around her neck, just barely visible beneath the edge of her collar, a thin leather cord holding a small silver pendant rested against the fabric. Not shiny. Not decorative. Worn smooth from years of touch. A symbol etched into it he did not recognize, but somehow understood was not meant for trade. His instincts spoke again. Not danger. Importance. Clara followed his eyes and gently covered the pendant with her hand. "If they see that," she said, "everything becomes complicated." Elias nodded slowly. "Everything already is." The riders below were closer now. Shapes becoming men. Coats. Hats. Purpose. Clara took one slow breath. "If they ask, you tell them I left." Elias asked, "Did you?" She looked directly at him for the first time without the shield of the hood. No, another long silence passed. Then Elias reached up, took the reins of his mule, and turned the animal toward the narrow upper trail leading deeper into the mountains where the path narrowed to barely 4 feet wide, and only men who knew the land could travel safely. Then we should probably get moving. Clara did not ask where. She did not argue. She simply walked beside him. After a few steps, she said something so quietly it almost disappeared into the sound of the wind. You are going to regret this. Elias looked ahead toward the long climb home, toward the timberline where snow already waited. Probably. A few more steps passed before he added, but I would regret the other choice longer. The trail narrowed as they climbed, the wide trading road fading behind them into a thin ribbon of dirt and stone that twisted upward through tall ponderosa pines and granite outcroppings, the kind of path that forced strangers to slow down and forced pursuers to think twice. Elias walked slightly ahead now, his steps steady and practiced, every turn of the trail familiar to him like the lines on his own hands. Clara followed without complaint, matching his pace without asking how much farther or how steep the climb would become. That was another thing he noticed. Most people asked questions when the air grew thinner and the ground grew harder. She conserved her words like someone trained to survive long journeys. After nearly half a mile of climbing, Elias stopped near a fallen log that overlooked the valley below. From there, the entire lower pass opened like a map. The trading post looked small now. The riders looked closer. Too close. Elias crouched slightly, resting one arm on his knee as he studied their movement. 3 men. Good horses. Purpose in their direction. They had not stopped at the trading post. They had asked questions and kept riding. Clara saw it too. They are not guessing, she said quietly. They know. Elias nodded once. Someone told them which trail I use. He did not sound angry, just certain. Clara lowered herself onto the fallen log with careful control, like someone who had learned never to waste energy. If they catch up to you because of me, you should know something. Elias did not look away from the valley. What is that? She hesitated just long enough to suggest the truth mattered. I did not run because I was afraid. That made him glance toward her. Then why? Her eyes followed the riders below. Because staying would have caused more damage. The answer carried weight, he could feel even if he did not yet understand it. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of dried venison wrapped in cloth and handed it to her without comment. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, but again did not eat immediately. Instead, she broke it cleanly in half and handed part back. Elias raised an eyebrow slightly. You should keep it. Clara shook her head. No one travels far alone by staying alone. That sentence stayed with him longer than he expected. The wind moved through the trees again, carrying the sound of a distant voice echoing faintly up the slope. Not shouting, calling, searching. Elias stood slowly. We have maybe 20 minutes before they reach the lower fork. Clara rose with him. And after that, Elias pointed toward a narrow cut between 2 rock faces higher up the mountain, barely visible unless you knew where to look. After that, the trail disappears unless you know where to place your feet. Clara studied the passage, and for the first time a small trace of relief crossed her face. You trust me enough to take me there? Elias adjusted the strap on his shoulder. I trust what I see, Clara asked softly. And what do you see? Elias took a breath before answering. Someone worth protecting until I know the whole story. That seemed to surprise her more than anything else he had said. They started walking again. The climb steeper now, loose gravel shifting under their boots. After several minutes, Clara spoke again, her voice quieter than before. If things turn difficult, there is something you should know before it is too late. Elias did not stop walking. Tell me. She looked straight ahead as she answered. I was not supposed to meet you. Elias almost smiled at that. Most important things happen that way. Clara let out a slow breath and said words that felt heavier than the mountain air. And you were not supposed to matter. The path through the rocks was barely wider than a wagon axle, a narrow passage where the mountain decided who passed and who turned back, and Elias moved through it with the quiet confidence of a man who had trusted this land longer than he had trusted people. Loose stones shifted underfoot, sliding down the slope in soft, rattling sounds that disappeared into the valley far below. Clara followed carefully, watching where he placed each step, understanding without being told that survival here was less about strength and more about attention. After nearly 15 minutes of steady climbing, the trees opened into a small hidden clearing no bigger than half an acre, surrounded by tall granite walls and thick evergreens that blocked the wind. A small cabin sat near the tree line, built from hand-cut logs darkened by years of weather, smoke rising thin and straight from a stone chimney. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted, just enough. Elias stopped at the edge of the clearing and waited, studying the silence the way a careful man always did before stepping into what he called home. Satisfied, he nodded once and walked forward. "This is as far as most people ever get," he said. Clara stepped into the clearing slowly, her eyes taking in everything. The stacked firewood cut to exact length, the water barrel placed where snowmelt would fill it, the animal tracks that showed this place was respected even by wildlife. "You built this alone," she said. Elias tied the mule to a worn hitching post. "Took 5 summers." Clara asked, "Why here?" Elias answered simply, "Because nobody else wanted it." That answer seemed to mean more to her than he realized. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of cedar smoke and iron cookware, a small cast iron stove glowing with quiet heat, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, a shelf of carefully folded blankets. Everything placed with intention. Elias poured water into a tin kettle and set it on the stove. Clara remained near the doorway for a moment before stepping fully inside, as if crossing an invisible line of trust. "You can stay until dark," Elias said. "After that we decide what comes next." Clara slowly reached up and finally lowered her hood completely. For the first time her face was fully visible in the firelight, not dressed in fear or pride, just honesty. There was strength there, and something else. Relief she did not want to show. She reached into the inside seam of her cloak and removed something wrapped carefully in cloth. Not hurried, not dramatic, just inevitable. She placed it gently on the table and unfolded the fabric. Inside lay a small document sealed with faded blue wax and marked with an official crest Elias did not recognize but immediately understood meant authority. Alongside it rested the silver pendant he had glimpsed earlier, now fully visible, engraved with symbols that spoke of 2 worlds meeting. Clara watched his reaction carefully. "This is why they are looking," she said. Elias did not touch the items, did not interrupt. Clara continued, her voice steady but quieter now. "I was not being sold because I was worthless. I was being moved because someone wanted this paper to disappear." Elias finally spoke. "What is it?" Clara met his eyes directly. Proof that a promise was made between people who were never supposed to trust each other. The cabin grew very quiet. Outside, far below, the faint echo of riders searching the wrong trails drifted into nothing. Elias looked at the paper again, then at her. "And now," Clara gave a small tired breath. "Now I am trusting the one man who did not ask what I was worth." The fire in the small iron stove gave off a steady orange glow, the kind of warmth that did not just heat a room, but slowed a racing mind. And Elias remained standing beside the table, his eyes resting on the document without touching it, as if he understood some things carried more weight than paper. Clara watched him carefully, perhaps expecting questions about money or reward or danger, but none came. Instead, he asked something else. "Does anyone else know you brought it here?" Clara shook her head slowly. "No one who would follow you this high." Elias nodded slightly, as if that was the only answer that mattered. Outside, a cold gust brushed against the cabin walls like a reminder that the world below still existed. But inside there was only the quiet ticking of cooling metal and the soft sound of water beginning to heat in the kettle. Clara rested her hand lightly against the pendant now lying on the table. "This was given to my mother many years ago," she said. "A sign that peace could exist if someone was willing to believe in it long enough." Elias listened without interruption. She believed words could build bridges stronger than fear. She was wrong about many things, but not that. Elias finally pulled out a chair and sat, his movements slow and thoughtful. "And you believe that too?" Clara did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried something heavier than hope. "I believe promises should not disappear just because the wrong people want them forgotten." Elias looked again at the crest pressed into the wax seal. "And those men down there?" Clara answered plainly. "They were told to make sure this agreement never reached the governor's office in Carson City." Elias let out a quiet breath. Carson City was more than 200 miles away. That meant this was bigger than one mountain or one town. Bigger than him. Clara seemed to read that realization on his face. "You did not choose this," she said. "You only chose kindness." Elias leaned back slightly in his chair. "Kindness usually costs less." For the first time, Clara allowed a small real smile to appear, brief but genuine. Not this time. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not strangers sharing space. Two people carrying the same secret for different reasons. After a moment, Clara reached into her cloak again and removed something else, something Elias had not seen before. A small folded photograph protected between two thin pieces of tin. She opened it carefully and slid it across the table. "This is why I knew your name." Elias looked down. The photograph showed a much younger version of himself, maybe 10 years earlier, standing beside a supply wagon in the same trading post valley. He barely remembered the day, but he remembered the moment. A sick woman. Snow coming early. He had given directions to a safer trail and a place to find shelter. Nothing important. Nothing worth remembering. Clara spoke softly. "That woman was my mother." Elias blinked once, surprised not by the connection, but by how small the world suddenly felt. Clara continued. "She told me if I was ever lost in these mountains, I should trust the quiet man who helped without asking for anything." Elias stared at the photograph a long moment before pushing it gently back toward her. "I do not remember doing anything special," Clara answered with quiet certainty. That is why she remembered. Evening settled slowly over the high ridge, the fading sunlight turning the granite walls outside the cabin the color of old copper. And inside the small room the quiet had changed again. No longer the silence of strangers, but the silence of people who now shared something fragile. Elias added another piece of firewood to the stove, and the small crackle filled the space between them. He did not ask why she had come specifically to him. He already understood. Clara folded the photograph carefully and placed it back inside her cloak like something sacred. "She said you never looked at people the way others did," Clara said. Elias gave a faint shrug. "Most people are too busy deciding what someone is worth." Clara studied him with the same careful attention she had shown since the beginning. "And you are not." Elias shook his head slightly. "I just never had much myself. Makes it easier not to measure others." Outside, the sound of wind moved through the pine trees again, but now another sound existed beneath it, faint but real, the distant echo of horses somewhere lower on the mountain. Not close, but not gone. Clara heard it too. Her shoulders did not tense, but her eyes sharpened. "They will keep looking until they are certain." Elias nodded. "Men like that do not like unfinished business." Clara rested her hands lightly on the table, her fingers brushing the edge of the document without opening it again. "If they find this place, I do not want you involved." Elias answered without hesitation. "Too late for that." She held his gaze. "You could still say you found me and knew nothing." Elias almost smiled. "I would be very bad at saying that." For a moment something softer passed through Clara's expression, something she quickly hid behind composure. "You do realize helping me could change your life." Elias leaned his forearms on the table, his voice calm and certain. "My life changed when I spent that coin. Everything after is just the trail I chose." The words stayed in the air between them. Clara seemed to weigh them carefully before asking something different. "Why do you live this far from everyone?" Elias took his time answering. "Because out here a man is only what he does, not what people say about him." Clara nodded slowly like someone who understood that more than she wanted to admit. The kettle began to whisper as the water reached heat. Elias poured 2 cups and slid one toward her. This time she drank. Outside, the last light of day faded and the first cold stars appeared above the tree line. After a long, quiet minute, Clara spoke again, her voice lower now. "There is something else you should know." Elias waited. "If this document reaches the governor, it will force a meeting between leaders who have avoided each other for years. Some people want that. Others are afraid of what peace changes." Elias considered that. Peace changes who profits from trouble. Clara looked at him with a small look of surprise. "Yes." Another long silence passed before she added, "My mother believed people like you were the only reason peace ever had a chance." Elias looked down at his hands, scarred from years of work, nothing remarkable about them. "I am just a trapper." Clara answered quietly. "No, you are proof she was right." Outside, somewhere beyond the dark trees, a single distant voice called out again into the night air, searching, patient, unwilling to give up. Elias stood and moved to the small window, looking into the darkness without fear. "They will not climb in the dark," he said. Clara asked softly, "How do you know?" Elias answered without turning. "Because up here the mountain decides who is brave and who is foolish." Then after a moment he added quietly, almost to himself, "Tomorrow we find out which they are." Morning arrived without color at first, only a pale gray light pressing softly against the frost on the cabin window. And Elias was already awake before the sun touched the upper peaks, sitting at the small table with a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. He had slept little, not from fear, but from the quiet understanding that some days arrive carrying decisions that cannot be postponed. Clara stepped from the small corner where he had given her the only proper bed, her movements quiet, already composed, already prepared. She did not ask if he had slept. She already knew the answer. Outside, the sky slowly turned from gray to washed blue, and with the light came confirmation. Elias stood at the window again and looked down toward the lower slopes. They had climbed higher during the night than he expected. 4 riders now, not 3, spaced out along the trail below like men searching carefully rather than chasing blindly. Clara joined him at the window but kept enough distance to avoid being seen from outside. "They are patient," she said softly. Elias nodded. "That makes them more dangerous than fast men." Clara studied their slow progress. "They are not here to harm you." Elias gave a small breath that might have been humor. That is usually when harm happens anyway. A long quiet moment passed before Clara did something she had not done before. She removed the pendant from around her neck completely and held it in her palm, looking at it not as protection but as responsibility. "If they reach this cabin," she said, "I will go with them." Elias did not turn from the window. "No." The word came simple and certain. Clara looked at him. "You cannot decide that." Elias finally faced her. "I already did." She searched his face for hesitation and found none. "Why?" Elias answered the only way he knew how. "Because you did not run here to be sent back." Clara lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back with something new in them. Not gratitude. Trust. Outside, the riders stopped at the lower fork where the trail divided into 3 paths. Elias watched as they spoke among themselves, pointing, deciding. Then something unexpected happened. From the far eastern ridge, beyond even Elias's trap lines, movement appeared. Not loud, not fast. Quiet figures on horseback emerging from the morning light. 1, then 3, then more. Clara saw them too, and her breathing changed. Not fear, not relief, something deeper. Recognition. Elias counted without speaking. 6 riders. Then 8. Moving with calm purpose. Not hiding, not threatening, simply present. Clara's voice came barely above a whisper. "They found me first." Elias asked quietly, "Friends?" Clara nodded. "Family." The 2 groups of riders had not yet seen each other, separated by distance and trees, but the direction of the day had already changed. Elias stepped back from the window. "Then today ends different than they planned." Clara held the pendant again, her fingers steady. "You could still step away." Elias shook his head. "I never liked unfinished stories." Outside, the sun finally broke over the mountain edge, casting long gold light across the clearing. And for the first time since she arrived, Clara allowed herself to stand without the hood, without hiding, her shoulders straight, her presence no longer that of someone running, but someone ready to be seen. Elias noticed and said nothing. Some things deserved silence. After a moment, Clara spoke one last quiet truth. "My mother said the right man would not try to own my future." Elias answered without hesitation. "Your future was never mine to own." And for the first time since this began, Clara smiled without caution. The mountain morning carried a strange stillness as both groups of riders finally became aware of each other across the lower ridge, not through shouting or sudden movement, but through the quiet understanding that comes when people who know the land recognize who belongs and who does not. Elias stood just outside the cabin now, one hand resting lightly on the wooden fence rail he had built years before, his posture calm, not claiming ownership of the moment, only witnessing it. Clara stepped forward beside him, no longer hidden beneath cloth or silence, the morning light catching the silver pendant in her hand as she held it where it could be seen. Down below, the 4 searching riders slowed their horses. Across from them, the 8 who had arrived from the eastern ridge did not hurry either. No one reached for anything. No one raised their voice. The mountain did not allow foolishness in places like this. Clara took one step forward into the open clearing where she could be clearly seen from below. Elias did not follow. This was her moment. After a long minute, one of the eastern riders removed his hat, a gesture simple and respectful. And even from that distance, Elias could feel the shift. Recognition had replaced pursuit. Clara lifted the document in her hand just high enough to be unmistakable, then lowered it again, not as a threat, but as a promise she intended to keep. The four riders remained where they were, uncertainty now replacing their earlier certainty. They had not expected this ending. None of them had. After several long silent minutes, they turned their horses. No hurry, no pride, just the quiet acceptance of men who understood the story had changed beyond them. Elias watched until they disappeared into the lower timber before turning his attention back to Clara. The eastern riders approached slowly but stopped well short of the cabin, giving her the space to choose her own steps. Clara looked back at Elias one last time before walking a few paces toward them, then stopping halfway between two worlds. "You could come with us," she said, her voice carrying easily in the clear air. Elias considered it only a second before shaking his head gently. "My place is here." Clara seemed to expect that answer. She walked back toward him instead and placed something small on the rough wooden table just inside the open doorway. The same silver dollar, cleaned, polished by her hands. Elias frowned slightly. "I told you that was not why I helped." Clara answered softly. "I know. That is why I am returning it." He looked at the coin but did not pick it up. Clara continued, her voice steady but warmer now. "My mother used to say some men change history with power. Others do it by refusing to measure people like property." Elias said nothing. Clara placed the folded document back inside her cloak and stepped away, then paused one final time. "If this agreement holds, there will be fewer reasons for people like me to run." Elias gave a small nod. "That sounds like a good trade." Clara smiled faintly. "The best ones usually are." She turned then and walked toward her waiting riders, not hurried, not uncertain, just certain of her direction now. Elias watched until they disappeared into the high morning light beyond the trees. The clearing grew quiet again. Just wind, just sky, just the simple life he had chosen. After a long moment, he finally picked up the silver dollar and turned it slowly between his fingers, before setting it on the shelf above his fireplace where the light would always touch it first. Some men kept trophies. Elias kept reminders. Outside, the mountain stood unchanged, but something unseen had shifted all the same. And for the first time in many years, Elias Whitaker allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, knowing that sometimes the cheapest thing a man ever buys can become the most valuable thing he ever proves.